Scripture reading this morning is going to come from Mark chapter 6. Mark chapter 6, verses 47 through 52. When it was evening, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was alone on land. Seeing them straining at the oars, for the wind was against them, at about the fourth watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea, and he intended to pass by them. But when they saw him walking on the sea, they supposed it was a ghost, and cried out. For they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke with them and said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." Then he got into the boat with them, and the wind stopped, and they were utterly astonished, for they had not gained any insight from the incident of the loaves, but their heart was hardened.
Well, good morning. Good to see you all this morning. If you're visiting with us, especially thank you for being here. We're going to be looking this morning out of the Gospel of Mark, second Gospel. If you're visiting with us, don't have a Bible, and the Pew Bible, that's page 789. But the second Gospel account, of course, we look to, people often say it's the Gospel of action, gospel that perhaps was written to the Romans because they like action. That's somewhat conjecture and somewhat true, I suppose. The Romans, no doubt, people in Rome read this gospel. Indeed, many times through the Gospel of Mark, we're told that Jesus is immediately going somewhere. His disciples are immediately doing something. So probably there is some truth in that. But we'll be looking at the Gospel of Mark this morning. I do appreciate the elders asking me to speak this morning. Great leap of faith on their part. We've only been here a month or so. I'm best known through my children, though, so maybe it's a good risk. Connor has been here for a while, Riley as well, and Alyssa and Amanda. Of course, those two little guys that have come along. And my best attribute, of course, is my wife. And some of you have not gotten a chance to meet her yet, but you will, I hope. You'll get to know her, and she's immediately recognizable. She's the cutest looking woman back here in this part of the auditorium. So the Gospel of Mark, chapter 6, 7, and 8, just a few lessons out of that. Appreciated Dan. This hitches a little bit onto some of the thoughts he's presented from the Old Testament. In the matter of our hearts, what does God expect from us? What did God expect from people at any time in human history? But our whole hearts. And we should get that. And the Gospel of Mark gets to that. Jesus again and again tries to get at people to understand. I want your heart. I want your whole heart. I don't want just your heart as you want to bring it, maybe kind of sort of when you get around to it. I want your softened heart. I don't have much use for a hardened heart, God's going to tell us through the Word. I want your softened heart. A soft heart I can work with. Think about a plot of land. Many of you have studied this before, so I'm telling you nothing much new this morning, but maybe you haven't thought about it this way. A piece of land that's soft, I can plow, I can plant. A lot of us aren't farmers. Some of you never grew up around farmers. I grew up around pig farmers. That doesn't mean you plant pigs. That means that you actually are around people that work with pigs all the time. We kept our distance from them. But I grew up around cabbage fields. I grew up around cornfields. I grew up around places where people farm for a living. If the ground is too hard, like you find in Colorado sometimes, you're not going to be able to plant it very well. Your heart is just like that. In the sense that if it's not soft, God can't plow it as easily. God can't plant the word as easily. That is up to you, not to him, whether or not your heart is soft. And again in these 3 chapters of Mark, Jesus gets around to those lessons. So I've appreciated Dan very much and what he's presented over this last month from the old word about how God expects our hearts to be and what God expects of us in preparation to receive his word. I've known Dan a long time. I've known Dan so long that when I first knew Dan, he had a full head of curly hair. You can tell him I said that. Of course, in those days, I used to have a head of hair myself, not as much anymore. But the nature of our Father, from the Old Testament that Dan has taught from so well, to today, when we look at the New Testament word, the nature of God has not changed. Now, human history seems cyclical because it seems like the same things happening over and over again. I can assure you, as a student of history, as a teacher of history, that's just not the case. History is going somewhere. History is linear. It's taking us to the second coming. It's taking us until the time that we can rise again with him. Isn't that true? I mean, history's linear. If it's cyclical, then we are just all hamsters on a wheel. That's not the case. What makes it appear so is because human nature is similar time after time after time. People tend to do the same silly things again and again. But God's nature, thankfully, is eternal as well. And so God comes and tells us what we need to know in order to correct what human nature truly is and how that human nature trips us up again and again. Mark chapter 6, I want to pick up down through the chapter after the time that we're told that John the Baptist is beheaded. Now, John the Baptist, who said, "Behold, the Lamb of God, who taketh away the sins of the world." John the Baptist, who would have known of Jesus of Nazareth almost from the time he was born. Not quite, of course. They are cousins of sorts, I suppose, aren't they? And so he would have known of Jesus of Nazareth. And John the Baptist, who Jesus went to and said, "I need to submit to God just as others are doing. Not that I have sinned, but I need to do this to be pleasing to God." It's an amazing relationship when you think about it, and a tale for another day. Imagine if someone that close to you died. Imagine if you're Jesus of Nazareth, which nobody here quite can. But imagine the closest person in your life virtually dies. And not just dies, but is beheaded. Imagine what you'd want to do. I know what I would want to do. I'd want to get away. I'd want to get away and think. I'd want to get away and pray. I'd want to get away and meditate. That's what I'd want to do. I think that's what almost any of us want to do. And here in Mark chapter 6, that's what Jesus wants to do. Matthew's much more plain about this, but Mark gets to the point as well. You get down to verse 28 and 29, we're told that John's head is brought back to the king on a platter, or to the ruler on a platter. And the disciples hear about this, his disciples, John's disciples. They came and took away John the Baptist's body, laid it in a tomb. And the apostles gathered together with Jesus, and they tell him what's happened. All that they had done and taught, they also told him, because they'd just been out and about. And Jesus tells them in verse 31, he said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a secluded place and rest a while." Now, we're told parenthetically, there are many people coming and going. They did not even have time to eat. Remember the point that what we're talking about here in the gospel accounts. Jesus is what some people have referred to as a celebrity. I hesitate to say that because it's such a cheapened term. But Jesus is well known. They can't hardly get away to have time by themselves. And now John the Baptist has been beheaded. So he tells his apostles, let's get away together. In verse 32, they went away in a boat, we're told, to a secluded place by themselves, but the people saw them going. Many recognized them and ran there together on foot from all the cities and got there ahead of him. Verse 34, we're told Jesus went ashore. He saw a large crowd. He felt compassion for them because they are like a sheep without a shepherd. And began teaching them many things. The other synoptics tell us he taught about the kingdom. What do they need to hear? What do they need to know? What do they need to be prepared for? The kingdom of heaven is at hand. It's been taught from the time that Jesus has come on the scene, and now he's teaching them again here about the kingdom of heaven. You read Matthew 13, front to back. It is replete with teachings about the kingdom of heaven. Here again, Jesus is teaching them about the kingdom of heaven. This is what you need to know. There are some points. Wouldn't you like to know more? This is one of those points I would like to know more about. We just don't know. What all did Jesus teach? I don't know. But we know he taught about the kingdom that day. Many things. Verse 35, it's quite late. His disciples come to him and they say, this place is desolate. It's already late. Send them away so that they may go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. Now, I'd recommend two things for you to remember here. What was the point of Jesus and his apostles getting away? What's happened? What's Jesus do? Tell everybody to leave him alone? Side note, and something to think about for another day, but consider this. When we need Jesus, does he tell us to get away from him? We pray to the Lord, what do? Or we pray through the Lord to the Father. Are we told to get away from him? He's too busy today. Never. Here, what is Jesus trying to do? Get away, think, meditate, pray, be with his disciples, the closest people to him on this earth. To really think about his close relative, John the Baptist, and these people have followed him. He teaches them. Spiritually, things come first with Jesus. He teaches them about what they need to know. Secondly, the physical. I'm going to take care of these people. I can't just send them away. He wants to mourn. I got to believe he wants to mourn at this point, the passing of John the Baptist. He's had no time. If you're a parent in this room, you can get this a little bit. If your child wakes up in the middle of the night and they're sick, what do you tell them? Go away? Call me in the morning. Take 2 aspirin, whatever you need to do. After I've had my coffee, come and bother me. And we chuckle at that because we know we'd never, ever do that. I didn't realize until I became a grandparent a few years ago, that just escalates. There's nothing that I wouldn't do for my kids. Save one, betray the father. And I guess you're the same way, or you wouldn't be here this morning. What are we told to do but to give God our whole heart first? Our whole heart. Not 95%, not 98%. We ought to be able to get this. Jesus illustrates how to treat others here and how to serve others. He's going to get to this point pretty quick about how much we need to give to God, and with a softened heart. And can't we understand this? We should get this. Now, I mentioned my wife is the prettiest girl in the auditorium this morning. I'm sorry, guys, that's the way it is, and I've embarrassed her a second time. What if I went home this afternoon and she said, I love you? I said, thank you very much. I love you with 97% of my heart. Several words come to mind. Pray for me, brethren, right? None of us is going to survive an exchange like that if we're married. When we love, we want to be loved in return, and not with 97% or 50% or 99%. We want the whole heart. But the only way we know how to love properly, thoroughly, is if we love the Lord first. That's simple stuff, it seems, but the world struggles with these things because it doesn't put God first. Jesus is forever preaching, put God first. Put him first. The words come across harshly. You need to hate your mother and father. In comparison, he's teaching, you need to put them second. You need to put me first. A lot of people don't want to do that. Here, Jesus is putting others first, but God comes before anything. Why is he treating them that way? Well, I know he's the Son of God, but it's because he knows how much the Father has given to him, how much the Father loves him. He is going to treat others similarly. Verse 37, Jesus answered, you give them something to eat. And they said to him, shall we go and spend 200 denarii, 200 days of wages on bread, and give them something to eat? Is that going to do it? And he said to them, how many loaves do you have? Go look. When they found out, they said 5 and 2 fish. So he commanded them all to sit down by groups on the green grass, and they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. He took the 5 loaves, 2 fish, looking up towards heaven, he blessed the food, broke the loaves, and he kept giving them to the disciples to set before the crowd. And he divided up the 2 fish among them all, and they all ate and were satisfied. They had everything they wanted. Plus, we are told they picked up 12 full baskets of the broken pieces and also of the fish. And there were 5,000 men there that day. And so if you do the calculation, who knows? 10,000, 12,000, doesn't matter. If I could take 7 loaves and 2 fish and feed this crowd, would you be impressed? How about 5,000, 10,000, 12,000? The point is what? I'm going to take care of these people. That's certainly one of the points here. What's the other point? Why am I doing this miracle if I'm Jesus? I can't read the mind of the Lord, but I know this. I can read the Gospel of John right at the end of the 20th chapter. And I know he did those signs and miracles, including this one, the only one that's recorded in all 4 of the Gospel accounts, because he wants me to understand and believe, because through that belief I can have life in his name. Why is he performing these miracles? Compassion for sure. They needed to believe. These disciples needed to be convicted. One of the most persuasive elements when you think about how to convince someone, if you ever have to do that, about the veracity of the biblical account. How could all these things be true? You're going to go off and die for a lie? You're going to do that? You're going to go off and fight and die for a lie, or preach the word and be beheaded like perhaps some of these apostles were going to be? They're supposed to take the word into all the world. You need to be sure. You need to be convicted of what you believe. Why is he performing these miracles? If I can do this, do you have to wonder about anything that you need? Not a thing. And so this is the great miracle. It's recorded in all four of the gospel accounts. Immediately, we're told, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat, go ahead of him to the other side of Bethsaida. While he himself was sending the crowd away, he bid them farewell. He left for the mountain to pray. Finally, and again, if you're a parent, you know. If you're a friend who's had a real close friend who's needed you, you know. Finally, your time comes where you can actually do what you need to do. You can actually focus on your needs because their needs are taken care of. You come second or third or 15th that day. And you know what? If you love those people, if you love your kids, if you love your spouse, if you love your friend, that's okay. It was a great chance to serve somebody that day. But finally, Jesus gets his chance to go up to the top of the mountain and pray. Doesn't end. Verse 47, it's evening. It's evening. The boat's in the middle of the sea. Jesus is alone on the land. He sees them straining at the oars. The wind's against them. It's about the fourth watch of the night, which tells me and you it's sometime between 3 and 6 in the morning. They have to be exhausted. They're straining at the oars. It's the fourth watch. And he came to them walking on the sea, and he intended to pass by them. They see him walking on the sea, and they say, boy, sure I'm glad Jesus is here, right? They don't know what to think. They have just seen him feed however many thousand people with just a little bit of food. But they see him walking on the water, and they suppose that it's a ghost. And they cry out, we're told in verse 49. For they all see him, and they're terrified. In verse 50, we're told. Immediately he spoke with them and said to them, take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid. And he got into the boat with them, and the wind stopped, and they were utterly astonished. The words that Connor read just earlier, they're utterly astonished. Why? For they had not gained any insight from the incident of the loaves. But notice how the Gospel of Mark puts it here. But their heart was hardened. Who hardened their heart? Jesus hardened their heart? I'd suggest to you it wasn't Jesus that hardened their heart. It wasn't even that they didn't believe, and that's what hardened their heart. What are we used to seeing? People walking on water? What are we used to seeing? A crowd of thousands fed from just a kid's lunch? What are we used to seeing? We are confined by the physical space that we're given. We are confined by time. God is not. We know that, and we forget that, don't we? Or is that just me? Why do we worry so much? Why does Jesus preach and teach so often, like on the Sermon on the Mount? Don't worry. If I care for these little birds, I'm going to care for you. There's nothing that can happen to you I'm not going to know about, and I'm going to take care of you. Why is it we forget about that? I know I do sometimes. You can be assured that in May and June of this year, when we were getting ready to move, I went over our budget maybe 15 times. Anybody else ever do that before? Why do we worry? Now, we're foolish and we're unwise, and we're really not being good stewards if we don't take care of what God's given us and use it wisely. Anybody ever involved with budgeting or business or just running a family knows that. And yet, on the other hand, you can be paralyzed by fear. Jesus says, take courage. It's I. We've all been in the boat. We've all had the wind against us. We've all been at the fourth watch of the night where we don't know if we're going to make it across the rest of the lake. We've all been there. And it's difficult for us to remember that he can do anything. He's not confined by time and space. He's not confined by his physical body. So he really tries to make the point clear here. Now contrast this incident of the loaves, which they do not get, with what comes next. They get to the other side of the land, or the other side of the sea. They come to the land of Gennesaret. They moor to the shore, and I'm in verse 54 now. It says, when they got out of the boat, immediately the people recognized him. And they didn't wonder, and they didn't guess, and they didn't question. In verse 54, when they see what's going on, in verse 55, they ran about that whole country and began to carry here and there on their pallets those who were sick to the place where they heard he was. Wherever he entered villages or cities or countryside, they were laying the sick in the marketplaces and imploring him that they might just touch the fringe of his cloak. And as many as touched it, were being cured. It's a great story. You know, these disciples are utterly astonished. Their hearts are hardened, we're told. They can't quite fathom that this is Jesus walking on the water, and he can immediately, the other gospel accounts tell us, not in an hour, immediately, they're to the other side of the water. Most of us, if not all of us, have been somewhere at some given time and prayed to God about some problem, some difficulty, and we don't know if we're ever going to get to the end of it. We're in the middle of the lake. It is the fourth watch of the night. It could be a physical problem, could be an emotional problem, could be a problem with a child, could be a problem with a spouse, could be a problem with a friend, could be a problem with a country. Last time I checked, we live in an uncertain world. And the last time I checked, there's people in this audience that don't know what's going to happen next week. Got news for you. That's all of us, by the way. That can get in our minds, and we start to worry too much. What's going to happen next? What we do know with assurance is that God's with us. He's going to get us through it. But we've all been there where we've wondered, and we've struggled with that. Here's the thing. God's nature is eternal. What's he know? He knows what we need. He knows we need the assurance, and he knows we need deliverance. We may not get it exactly the way we expect, but he's going to take care of us. He will take care of us. So it's a wonderful story there in Mark 6. Move along with me to Mark 7 because a similar point's going to be made here. Mark 6 focuses on the heart ultimately. And our heart's hardened. That doesn't change. That really doesn't change. When you get into Mark 7, you have a similar situation, except it has to do with the teaching of the scribes and Pharisees, the people of that day that should have known about God. And we're told in chapter 7 that Pharisees, the scribes, gather around the Lord when they had come from Jerusalem, and they saw what? A lot of you know the tale. Some of you don't in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 7. They see the disciples of Jesus are eating with impure hands. They hadn't ceremonially washed. If you hadn't gone to Israel yet, go to Israel when you can, when the world settles down a little bit. And what you see are outside of old ancient Jewish homes, ceremonial wash basins, where they will fully immerse in the old days in order to be ceremonially clean. Ceremonially, got it close. What are these people worried about? If we don't wash in the way fitting to the traditions of the fathers, we won't be pleasing to God. They're worried about not doing the right thing. Stop right there. Anybody worried about not doing the right thing today? Anybody else worried about the possibility of sin tripping them up in this life? Yeah, everybody's head should be going like that. Everybody worries. In fact, sometimes we worry so much about that we can make our lives difficult in ways we shouldn't. What should we do? Should remember God's always with us again. But what? We want to be right. The reason why we worry is not because we're awful people. The reason that we worry and try to keep ourselves apart from those things is because we want to be right with God. Think back to school days. Just brought up a bad memory for some, and for some of you, it just started all over again. If someone could give you all the answers to every exam this week, would you take them? Yeah, I just saw a lot of smiles. Would you like to know what the answers are on any exam? Or if you're not in school now, but if you're in a professional field, how much would you like to just pass that certification test? Get through that safety training. We all want the answers. We all want to be right. Doesn't make us bad people. We want to be right. Spiritually, these people want to be right. They go around the wrong way to that goal, though. Now, they want to be right, so they wash ceremonially. They think that's going to do it. Verse 3 in chapter 7, parenthetically, we're told by Mark that the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they carefully wash their hands, thus observing the traditions of the elders. And then you go further. Mark tells us when they come from the marketplace, they don't eat unless they cleanse themselves. And there are many other things which they have received in order to observe, and such as the washing of cups and pitchers and copper pots. It's a world not like ours in that way. And so they're trying to do what's right in their minds. And so they question Jesus and his apostles. Why don't your disciples, in verse 5, Why don't your disciples walk according to the traditions of the elders, but eat their bread with impure hands? Now, Jesus can do what we can't do. John makes it very clear in his gospel that Jesus didn't need anybody to tell him what man was like, to paraphrase. He knew, and he knows what's in a man. He knows the heart. We can't know things like that. Jesus could. He could look at those people and know. And so what he tells them is what they need to hear here. You're thinking about the wrong things. And he puts it pretty clearly. What he tells them is this. What he tells them is this in verse 6. Rightly did Isaiah, tells them things that they knew, some of these people by heart. Rightly did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites, as is written, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In other words, you're washing the cups. You're washing the copper pots. You're washing your hands. And you're criticizing me and criticizing my apostles because we're not ceremonially washing. And yet I know what you're doing, and other people see you do it too. You're not living what you teach and preach. How dare you? That's what he's telling them, right? You hypocrites. You hypocrites. Isaiah was right about you. Your heart's far away from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the precepts of men, neglecting the commandment of God. You hold to the tradition of men. And then he goes on and excoriates them further. You're experts at setting aside the commandment of God in order to keep your tradition. He goes on from there. It's pretty rough. Why? He looks at that group of people who have challenged him, challenged his authority in many ways. What's he doing? Be careful. Be careful in what you're saying. Be careful in what you're requiring. Your heart's not where it should be. Your heart's far from God. You think you can get around the matter of your heart by doing things that are traditional, ceremonial. Who's ever heard of checkbox Christianity before? Everybody, just about. If you're visiting with us, what we mean by that is this. You can show up and sit on a pew. You can show up and sit on a pew and participate in the prayers, pretty much. You can show up, sit on a pew, and participate in the prayers, even give your means, even take the Lord's Supper, and we've done all these things, these acts of worship. If you leave it there and live a completely different life outside these four walls, where are you? You check the boxes off, but your heart's far from God. We can fall into these same things, fall into things and treat them as traditions and not live our lives the way we should. We all face that temptation. If you think you don't, think again. We all face that temptation because the world's a difficult place. We are constrained, again, by time, space, circumstances. Why don't we give God our whole heart, our softened hearts? It's not even necessarily that we want to do things that we shouldn't do outside these four walls. It's because we feel constrained and we feel tempted and we yield to those things. It's why God speaks to us so strongly about these things and why Jesus taught so directly about these things. Beware of that. Avoid that. So that's what Jesus is teaching these people here. He gets very, very plain about it. Verse 14, he calls the crowd to him again, and he says to them, listen to me, all of you, and understand there's nothing outside the man that can defile him if it goes into a man. That's their supposition, right? You wash, you're good. Jesus says, no, that's not what does it. What defiles a man is not what goes into him, but what's coming out of him. That's how you can tell. There's nothing outside the man which can defile him if it goes into him, but the things which proceed out of the man are what defile the man. He leaves the crowd, enters the house. His disciples question him about the parable, and Jesus asks them in verse 18, are you so lacking in understanding also? Don't you understand that whatever goes into a man from the outside cannot defile him, because it does not go into his heart, but into his stomach, and is eliminated? And then in verse 20, he says, that which proceeds out of the man, that's what defiles the man. For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed the evil thoughts, fornications, thefts, murders, adulteries, deeds of coveting and wickedness, as well as deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, and foolishness. You tell me those things haven't changed in 2,000 years. All you got to do is get up and look at the paper. Of course, there is no physical paper anymore unless you really want to find a physical paper. Anybody else do that in here? I do that. Get the Wall Street Journal every morning in my driveway. Then I read the electronic version anyway. I don't know why. It's just how I'm made. All you got to do is look at any news source. Don't want to do that? All you got to do is wander around downtown. All you got to do is walk across the countryside a little bit. What do you see? People drawn into these same things. Where'd those things come from? What they ate? I mean, we know that's ridiculous. Where do those things come from? From their heart. Why? Because they chose that. They chose that. People choose their actions. It's our actions that define us. We know that. It's intuitive within us. We know that. And that's what Jesus is teaching here. Those things that proceed out of us, all the evil things in verse 23 that he says, proceed from within. That defiles the man. Now, I want to contrast again that very quickly in chapter 7 with what comes at the end. People that should have known better chose not to know better. Even his closest apostles struggled with getting over that burden of what the physical is versus what the spiritual is. The physical is easier to take care of. It's easy just to show up to a building. I realize it's 8, 9, 10 o'clock in the morning and, it's early on a Sunday, but, it's relatively speaking not that difficult to get to a building. The hard part is living the right life once you leave this building. It's difficult for everybody. That's why we have each other. That's why we call each other brothers and sisters. That's why we call it a congregation. That's why we call it the church, right? The Lord's body. We're supposed to help each other. We're supposed to support each other. And you know what? What's impressed me over the last better part of a decade that we visited here, first it was Riley that was here, then it was Connor and Amanda that moved out here, then Riley moved back, and then Riley, it's just been all of this over the last decade or so. But we've enjoyed coming out here. It's not just the mountains. They're pretty. They're beautiful. It's the people. There's people in this congregation that we've seen here off and on for the better part of a decade. It's easy to see when a group of people care about each other. I've seen that. And when I hear Dan preach and teach, it's hard to hide if you don't like people. I'll just say this because Dan's not here. Don't tell him I said this. I don't want to get the big head here. It is hard to hide when you don't like people. Dan likes people. Dan cares about people. Dan wants to help people. And that comes from a lot of practice and a good raising, but also a lot of encouragement. But it comes from his heart. It's difficult to live the right kind of life, the life that God would want us to live in this world. It's not easy. We all work at it every day, but we're here to help each other. That's what it's about. And so people that should have known chose not to know. But look at verse 24. When Jesus got up, went away from there to the region of Tyre, he entered a house. Notice, he can never find time for himself. It says here in verse 24, he wanted no one to know of it, but he could not escape notice. He's been doing miracles now for a little bit. If you knew Jesus was in a house and he was nearby, and you had someone who was sick, what would you do? Stay away? I'd be running there. If you know someone with cancer, and virtually everybody in this room does, and you had to pick them up and carry them on your back and carry them 3,000 miles to get a cure, we're all doing that. You're going to be doing whatever it takes. And so a woman comes to him because although Jesus doesn't want to be noticed, she's going to seek him out. And she's just not anybody. She's not a Jew, and she's someone who knows she doesn't belong. She's going to seek him out anyway. After hearing of the Lord, a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately came to him, fell at his feet. Where's her heart? I just ask you to pause there and put it back together with the rest of the thoughts here. I'd say her heart's right with God, but she's not a Jew. She's a Syro-Phoenician woman. What's Jesus going to call her in the verses coming up? And a lot of you know because you know the story. I'm not here to give the bread to dogs. Now, we speak plainly to people sometimes. I've never spoken this plainly to someone. But I'm convinced, I'm persuaded, it's not because he wants to hurt this woman's feelings. He's trying to make the point. I'm here to take care of God's children. You're a Syro-Phoenician woman. In the eyes of people that are God's people, you're a dog. Man, those are hard words. We live in a world that protects, especially in America, a world that protects the rights of the individual. In the ancient world, the rights of the individual are at the mercy of the ruler. That's it. That's all. And so, she didn't run away. She didn't criticize. She didn't yell back when he's going to tell her these things. And she keeps on. Verse 26, we're told who she is, a Gentile, Syrophoenician race. She kept asking him to cast the demon out of her daughter, and he's saying to her, let the children be satisfied first. It is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. She answered and said to him, yes, Lord, but even the dogs under the table feed on the children's crumbs. In a world where our feelings are hurt so easily, where things have been talked about over the last years, anything should offend us. And I'm not saying there shouldn't be things that shouldn't offend us at all. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying it's a different world. We can hardly imagine this. Even the dogs eat the crumbs from under the children's table. What she's showing here about her great faith, right? Her tender heart. She's heard about Jesus. She's willing to seek him out. It's too much for one morning, but when you have a chance, go back and look at Mark 5. When you get a chance, read about that woman who's mentioned in all three of the synoptic gospel accounts, who has that matter of blood, and she falls to the ground, crawls through the legs and the dirty feet of other people just to be healed by the Lord, because she knew all she had to do was touch the fringe of the cloak. Just reach for the promises of God, which is symbolized by the tassels right there in the corner of that cloak. And Jesus knew she had touched him. The power had gone out of him. She was healed. This is very similar. How humble are you? I've got to look in the mirror every day. So do you. Some days I don't like to, but I look in the mirror. What do I see? Do I see a prideful person? Or do I see someone who will follow the ground and crawl, if that's what it takes to get to the promises of God? Now, we don't have to do that, you could say, because we've got the Word. It's true. Do you still have to humble yourself to follow it? To live the life we're supposed to live outside of these four walls, does that take humility? Does that take saying, I don't know how everything's going to turn out, but I trust that God's going to take care of me? That takes great humility. She shows that here. She shows that here. Because of your answer, Jesus tells her, go, the demon's gone out of your daughter. It's a great contrast. People that should have known chose not to know. This woman, who never should have probably known, knows. She knows of the Lord. You couldn't hide what he was doing. And she comes to him. She's humble enough to do that. Are we? Are we humble enough? And lastly, real quick this morning, Mark chapter 8. Mark chapter 8, not only did Jesus feed 5,000 plus, maybe 10, 12,000 in the reading of all four gospel accounts, but also in Mark chapter 8, to reiterate almost, he feeds 4,000 men, which means 8, 10, 12,000 again. Just to reiterate the power of God. Just in case you missed it the first time almost, God is saying. We're told in chapter 8, in those days when there was again a large crowd and they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples and said to them, I feel compassion for the people because they have remained with me now for 3 days, have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way, and some of them have come from a great distance. Now, I don't know about you. When I first read this, I thought, why aren't they getting this? They just saw what? And then they saw what? And what have they heard him teach? And this is just in the span of what we're told. God tells us what we need to hear, not everything that ever happened with Jesus. If these are the, if you like, highlights that we need to have in order to live a good life before him, what all else is God doing through Jesus? How many miracles has Jesus performed that they're witnessing? You know, the Gospel of John tells us that if you could write everything down, the world couldn't handle all the books that would be written. You think about how much they've seen. And so it's easy to get on the disciples, because my second question always was this. I mean, if they couldn't get it, what's the matter with these people? What is the matter with them? And then you look in that mirror again. If God got me through this problem, and you can name them off in your own life, if God got me through that illness, if God got me through that difficulty, if God took care of me in that situation, why don't I believe he can get me through this? Why? And it's not because we're terrible people. It's not because we're unfaithful people. It's because we're people that live physical lives. And we tend, if we're not careful, we tend to forget God does not. God cares about us, but he made all that we see. All that we know, all that we can fathom is from him. Every good thing we're told. When I get up in the morning now, I can look at those mountains. God made those mountains. We tell our kids to remember that. We need to remember that. We look at a little baby. God caused life to come into man. Why don't we remember that? And if God in our own lives has gotten us through so much, why do we doubt? It's because we haven't been through that storm before. We haven't been in the middle of that lake before. It's because we haven't been through that situation. But we need to remember. I need to remember. So here these apostles, they ask the question, where will anyone be able to find enough bread in this desolate place to satisfy these people? And so Jesus asks, how many loaves? And they say 7. And then some fish. And again, he gives thanks, breaks it, gives it to the disciples to serve to the people. They do all this again, right? Different place, similar scenario. He blesses the fish and the bread, orders these to be served, and they eat. Again, they're satisfied. They pick up 7 large baskets full of what was left over, and about 4,000 were there, and he sent them away. So he feeds thousands again. Now, the capstone to some of this in Mark 6, 7, and 8 comes next. They immediately get into a boat, cross the water. The Pharisees again decide to challenge him, argue with him, and ask for a sign. Jesus, to my mind, has the greatest patience ever known on the earth. I want to see a sign. Okay, great. I fed 4,000 plus, 5,000 plus. I've done all these. You want to see a sign. Gotcha. You want to see a sign. And so, the gospel accounts many times are understated. In verse 12, he sighs deeply in his spirit and he says, why does this generation seek for a sign? Truly I say to you, no sign will be given this generation. In other words, you people that don't believe in me. And he leaves them and he embarks and goes to the other side. They get into that boat, and after they've seen all these things, they get into that boat, and the disciples realize they brought no bread. They brought no bread. And they hear Jesus said this. Well, I'll take that back. They didn't have more than 1 loaf in the boat. And amongst that many guys, you know how guys eat. They virtually have no bread. And so in verse 15, he gives orders to them saying, watch out. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, the leaven of Herod. Bigger story for another day, but consider leaven grows. Leaven causes the lump to rise. You let the teaching of the Pharisees and the scribes get into you, it's going to change you. It's going to alter the way you think. It's going to keep you from really worshiping God the way you should, really serving him the way you should. Beware of that leaven. You stay away from that. But they associate leaven with bread, and they think that he's concerned about bread. They're not getting it. And so in verse 16, they began to discuss with one another the fact they had no bread. And Jesus is aware of this, and it's almost comical, isn't it? He says to them, why do you discuss the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet see? Do you not yet see or understand? Do you have a hardened heart? I would reckon those words hit like jackhammers. I left everything. If I'm Peter, I've left everything. You think about the other disciples. Tax collector left a pretty good livelihood. Even the zealot left his political beliefs. I have a hardened heart. And he's asking him, what is the matter? Why aren't you understanding? Do you have a hardened heart? Having eyes, in verse 18, he quotes the prophets to him. Do you not see? Having ears, don't you hear? Do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you pick up? And they said to him, 12. And when I broke, Jesus asked, when I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many large baskets full of broken pieces did you pick up? And they said 7. And he said to them, don't you understand? If we need bread, I can make bread. That is not a problem. And we might as well say that to ourselves. We all forget his care and his forgiveness. We all forget his shepherding, his guidance. We all forget his role in our lives. We all forget that he saved us. We all forget that because we get busy living our lives. We ought not do that, but we do that. And so that's a place where we all need to work on growing and encourage one another to remember. A heart can be hardened due to willful stubbornness. You think about Pharaoh and others. The rejection of God's authority can harden a heart. Paul writes about that time and again. We're susceptible because we neglect to remember the one we serve if we're not careful. The one who walked on water, fed the crowds, healed the sick, raised the dead. We forget because we live in a physical world bound by time, and he does not. And that's a great thing. And that's something we'd be thankful for every day. And so because of that, we can rely on him for just what we need. And we should. We should want to give our whole heart, our whole softened heart to him so we can work with it, continue to plant the seed in it, continue to see growth from that in our lives. We should be willing to do that. Maybe this morning you need to bring your heart to God. Maybe you need to realize that you need to bring your life to God and make that commitment. If you need to do that this morning, the elders are here to help you. If you have any other spiritual concerns, you can bring that to them. But if you have anything we can help you with this morning, we ask you to come forward as we stand and we sing.